Excellent. An ale for me. And for my officers. In fact, ales for everyone.
10 Backward. Rick and Wick. And Will. Sometimes Demmer.
Oh, yes.
Hello, I am Gemma Turland, and sitting to my right is Rick Everson.
Hello.
Ahead of me is Rick Palmer,
Hello.
and to his left is Will Turland.
All right.
And today's episode is going to be the Maquis.
Indeed. And this was chosen by you, wasn't it?
It was,
Gemma?
yes. Yes,
What provoked you to
My-
force us to talk about
my
possession?
absolute, unyielding, undying love for the Maquis.
You would
I-
be a Maquis.
I would
if
be a
you,
Maquis.
If you
I
were
would
in the
be-
Star
I
Trek
would
universe,
be,
you
yeah.
would be
Yeah.
an enemy of the Federation.
Jumping ahead. You're jumping ahead.
I know. I'm sorry. Yeah, that's one of our points.
Yes.
A lot further down.
I also love the Maquis. But I'm also interested in the original Maquis, who were the French resistance in World War II, and I have some information about them, if I may start
Oh,
with that.
what?
I don't know that they weren't even in space, Rick.
But it's to do with the name, where the name comes from.
Exactly,
what it
it is
means.
the genesis. The
Okay.
genesis of the idea.
Because we do have a structure for that. I mean, listeners may not think that we plan any sort of structure for our
We have-
episodes, but we do. We just
we
never
do.
keep to that.
We have started. We do tend to subvert it.
100%.
Yeah.
So I think the
But-
structure
but
is
yeah,
Genesis of the Star Trek Maquis, notable events and episodes,
Yeah.
and then
Oh.
thoughts
There was
about,
more than
thoughts
there
about
was-
the Maquis.
What do they show us about the Federation?
Yes.
And how do we feel about the Marquis?
Okay,
Um,
so in terms of the original Maquis, they were a rural guerrilla bands of French resistance fighters called Maquisards during the occupation of France in World War II. Initially, they were composed of men and women who had escaped into the mountains to avoid conscription into Vichy France's Service du Travail Obligatoire to provide forced labour for Germany. To avert capture and deportation to Germany, they became increasingly organised into resistance groups, some of whom would befriend a cafe owner and get into lots of comedic adventures featuring a very small tank and kind of baudy French comedy.
And,
Yeah.
Wasn't the little
Right.
tank driven by an ancestor of Malcolm Reed's?
Yes, and
Yeah.
and I know that because when the French resistance operated in a small town, they would have to be careful about the information that they gave out. So they would say, "Listen very carefully. I will say this only once."
Yeah.
So originally the word came from the kind of terrain in which the resistance groups hit. A type of high ground in southeastern France and Corsica, and the word Maquis is a Corsican term. Now, while strictly it means thicket, Maquis could roughly be translated as the bush. And I have to admit, when I found that out, I was at work and I did chuckle to myself.
I work with Rick. I sit next to him. I heard him chuckling about something, and I can confirm that he genuinely was chuckling to himself. But he was meant to be doing work, by the way, not researching.
You want to talk.
Hey, let's hope our employers do not listen to this podcast and learn about how we read stuff on Memory Alpha when we're meant to be doing our jobs.
Yeah, historians have not established how the Corsican term arrived in mainland France. Nevertheless, the Italian-derived word maquis, used as a common description of woods and scrubland on the island, evoked an all-encompassing image of woods and mountains, whereas the more limited word garrigue, used in the south of France, indicated an inhospitable terrain, and the words bois, forêt, and montagne were too bland.
Yeah,
term
they
maquis-
are boring.
The term maquis signified both the bands of fighters and their rural location. The term established the image of a maquisard as a committed and voluntary fighter, combatant, as distinct from the previous réfractoire, which meant unmanageable. Members of those bands were called maquisards. The term became an honorific that meant an armed resistance fighter, that's why that term came to symbolise the French resistance. There is a French theme kind of running through the Maquis with Eddington.
Well, I like the
Yeah.
fact that it's derived from the terminology around the inhospitable terrain, given the Marquis' penchant for hiding out in the Badlands.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
they like there's a kind of a weird sense of honour about the Maquis, which certainly Eddington feels when he joins the Maquis, and certainly the Maquis feel themselves. It's a fitting title for them. I think.
Yeah, in within the Star Trek universe, the Maquis. I mean, what I always love about the genesis of the Maquis there is it's our best example of cross-series story.
Yes.
Because the Maquis were actually initially established for Voyager.
Right.
Because
I read that.
they wanted. They realised this edict of Roddenberry's to have no conflict in the 24th century Starfleet perfection was always a little bit limiting on dramatic story possibilities. So, looking for a way to introduce conflict, they decided, let's have Starfleet have to join forces with this opposition band. So they start to lay the seeds for this the group, the Maquis, which they did throughout Deep Space Nine and Next Generation in Series 2 of DS9 and Series 7 of Next Gen. But actually, if you can look further back to Series 6 with Chain of Command and the Liberation of Bajor.
I think you can look even further back, because I think the genesis of the Maquis could be taken right back to the Wounded.
I
Well,
agree.
yes, actually, I think that's our introduction to the Cardassians, and that kind of sets things in motion, really, doesn't it?
And that episode is set after like a formal peace treaty. I took some information from Memory Alpha. Actually, it said the Federation Cardassian Wars, known in the Federation as the Cardassian Wars or the Border Wars, were prolonged conflicts between the Federation and the Cardassian Union, which started as far back as 2347 and lasted into the 2350s. Smaller skirmishes, not officially considered part of the wars, continued into the 2360s. The ensuing stalemate by the mid-2360s advantaged neither side in firepower or territory. A 2367 truce enforced the end to hostilities but left key questions unresolved. The finalised treaty, unsigned until 2370, formed a demilitarised zone between the powers, creating a new border and clarifying claims to planets such as Dorvan 5. The treaty and the creation of the demilitarised zone were the prompt for the creation of the Maquis. This is what I've put. Who felt threatened by the Cardassians because they would not honour the treaty, and abandoned by the Federation, who would.
Yes.
Yes.
So I think our first hint of the troubles on colonies comes in with, as you mentioned, Dorvan 5, where in Next Gen, Picard is ordered to essentially relocate the colony inhabitants, and ultimately, to resolve the problems, the colony decides to officially secede from the Federation and therefore is not subject to the treaty and maintains its presence on that planet.
And that's Journey's End.
That is Journey's End.
Yeah.
Yes.
Just quickly going back to The Wounded.
Yes.
I really like that episode. I do, and I agree with you. I think that's the point at which they set up a few things that will lead into things like Journey's End and then the Maquis and
so in
Preemptive Strike. And
and The Wounded is kind of about in brief. It's like a renegade Starfleet captain called Maxwell.
Ben Maxwell.
Maxwell, who is an officer that O'Brien has served under in the past, and he is relentlessly pursuing and blowing up Cardassian freighters, and Picard's sent to rein him in. And the crux of the episode is that he's kind of acting without any outside of Federation jurisdiction, but actually it turns out he's kind of right. And from a certain point of view, from your point of view, Gemma, when we watched the episode, Picard totally does one over on him.
Picard essentially acknowledges that he was right, but to preserve the treaty and stop another war, which kind of goes against Picard's character a little bit, I always felt.
I don't think it does.
I
don't think he does.
I think his first duty is to the truth.
His first duty is to Starfleet, and that sets up the Federation's attitude to this treaty, that they are willing. They know that the Cardassians they're not sticking to the treaty. They know what they're doing, but they will turn a blind eye to it.
This goes on for it does,
so that they can keep up the treaty. And
I think Ben Maxwell's the very first Maquis in a way. He's not.
Well, you could make a case for that,
but he is acting as the Maquis act, I think.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
As an interesting aside, though, and this is a very weird thing I read some years ago, when they came to write the episode Ensign Rowe and introduce the Bajorans, they weren't going to use the Cardassians. They were going to say the Bajorans were conquered by the Romulans. And it was only a very high-level producer, potentially Berman, I think, or Pillar, who said, we've had a lot of Romulans lately. Maybe use someone else like the Cardassians from that episode with Ben Maxwell. And how different the whole landscape of politics in the Alpha Quadrant could have been, and how Deep Space Nine and the Maquis thing could have been then, if not for the fact that one producer thought, well, we've seen a lot of the Romulans lately. Let's have someone
let's mix it up.
Yeah.
Let's bring in someone else. That's interesting.
But then also the Wounded sets up, it just has a rogue Federation character.
Yeah.
And then once you have that, you can imagine that character is quite divisive in terms of how it affects another ship, because I imagine being on that ship, there's a great bit where they're potentially going to give the transponder code of the Phoenix to the Cardassians.
Yeah.
I can imagine that moment on the bridge being like quite divisive. Like some people are like, why would you do
that?
Because
Worf is like, what? Well, he didn't say it like that.
Sir, they will be able to dismantle its shields. The Phoenix will not have a chance.
Cannot allow Maxwell to ambush that supply ship. Mr. Worf, now.
Yeah.
It also sets up the idea that the simple idea that you would have a rogue, that someone in Starfleet is gonna have a different idea.
Yeah.
Really, which is not something that's so far happened. Everyone toes the party line.
Yeah. But now here we have the first example, and as we go along, and this habit of Federation capitulations, the Cardassians' treaty violations, becomes, the norm. You're not surprised that colonies in the demilitarized zone don't trust the Federation to help them. They don't expect to have any backup if the Cardassians violate the treaty, because the Federation will continue to turn a blind eye. And then when that becomes an issue, okay, there are going to be people in the Federation and in Starfleet who are like, well, this shit does not fly with me. So, and I think definitely the seeds of the Maquis definitely set down from the Wounded, don't they?
Federation attitude is definitely in the Wounded and in Journey's End. Those episodes both have Picard dealing with an admiral saying, "This is what you need to do."
Yeah.
These are your orders.
And he's saying, "But this isn't right," and they're saying, "I know, but you have to do it."
Like in Journey's End, he has a great meeting with Admiral Nechayev.
Yes.
Who's in the Maquis as well, actually.
She is in the Maquis, yes.
And I really like Admiral Nechayev.
I know, she's fantastic.
Super tough and great. But in that meeting, she says, I know what you're saying. I know exactly what you're saying, but look, these are your orders.
I made that same argument with the Federation Council, but it took 3 years to negotiate this treaty. Some concessions had to be made, and this was one of them.
If you can't do it, I will find someone else to command the Enterprise. Motherfucker.
And
she's done it before.
She
put Jellicoe in. So.
In the I don't know the name of the episode with Ensign Rowe. With Rowe.
Oh, Preemptive Strike.
Yes. Preemptive Strike, when he is doing that to her.
Yes, he is.
Amazing scene.
Oh, that is a great scene.
It's a great scene. And he's laying that down.
That's a great example. That
extraordinary.
He has to take that from Nechayev, but then he does it out to Rowe as well.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
And she makes a different choice.
Yeah. But going back to Journey's End, I guess the crux of that situation is that Picard's ordered to move this Federation colony no matter what, and what ultimately happens is I was really distracted in this episode because there's loads of stuff about Wesley Crusher having magic powers, which I wasn't 100% on board with, and I find Journey's End a bit of a tough episode to deal with because
how did the Traveller? How did he work out to his Native American costume?
and why did he? I don't know. Was the Traveller there in the colony just waiting for? on the off chance that Wesley Crusher was going to show up. I mean, because everyone else seemed to know that.
I guess the traveller knows. Is he kind of? He must have some kind of secret.
We should save this for the Traveller podcast, shouldn't we? But anyway, I have some problems with Journey's End.
I'm not doing a podcast on fucking mitten fingers.
But
it's not a sex thing. Because
he's got
okay, right, got it. But yeah, but Journey's End does set up these colonies that are they're basically going to live under the compromises. They can stay on their planets, but they're going to be in the demilitarized zone under Cardassian.
I was thinking this. They've redrawn so there's a border and then there's a demilitarized zone around the border, but they've drawn the border so that Cardassian territory is in the Federation and the Federation territory.
I think they were doing it on an Etch a Sketch, and they did.
I was trying to work it out with the drawing.
But no, isn't it demilitarized? Is it like it's kind of the wishy-washy border where nothing is really
Well, they redefine the borders, and then there's an area around the border where
they're kind of warships, really.
Yeah. So we're kind of like it's a variation on the neutral zone.
Yeah,
in a way.
But in Journey's End, actually, there's a good scene where, and in general, the whole story kind of it kind of preempts the kind of issues that the Maquis have a problem with, in that the Federation are like, well, we need to get you off this planet, but we're going to find you another planet which is probably fine or good, and that just doesn't work. Like that whole thing. We'll just relocate you. This other planet would be lovely. It's pretty similar to where you are now.
Yeah.
And it's like you don't get it. Like there's a kind of essence of like, well, moving somebody to a different place. That doesn't mean anything. That's like if you've invested your time in a place.
They don't appreciate these people as individuals. They don't appreciate them as people who have thrown their entire life into these places. They're just.
Isn't it like Amphora says there's an intangible quality to their existence? Like there's something intangible about why those people are there.
They're just numbers.
But their homes have been reduced to negotiation points. To be given or taken, in exchanges to hammer out peace. And it's not fair on those people who live there.
Yeah, but then I suppose on the other hand, the Federation have to make a tough decision. They can either fail to come to an agreement and continue to have war, which will cost thousands of lives, or they can take a hit, anger some people, alienate them. But ultimately, they're bringing.
It also brings into it talks about the precariousness of the precariousness of the lives of people who are just living their lives there. An example of you'll know this if you're British, HS2, which is the super fast train track that they're building in this country, and they are forcibly buying people's home. The government,
people who are they're in the demilitarized zone of HS2, and
because they're in the way of the train track. The government is buying their homes and telling them they've got to move. Yeah. And they don't have a choice.
And airports as well. They've done it with airports.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's just you think this is your home and you bought this and this is your life and this is where you live, and then someone higher up is saying no.
They have that in America as well, don't they? With eminent domain, like the government can just buy your land, and with things like pipelines and all sorts of stuff, they'll. Yeah, it's an issue that definitely exists in the real world too.
I'm pleased that following Journey's End, Picard has learnt a bit about the wrongness of forced relocation. So when Insurrection rolls around, he's like strapping 7 tons of explosive to a llama because he's not fucking having it at this time.
To be fair, in Insurrection, and a little while ago, I never thought I'd find myself defending Insurrection, but since that podcast, I am. They're more sneaky. At least in Journey's End, they are trying to have an open discussion with these people, and it's from a pretty strong viewpoint, and there's not a lot of negotiation there, but at least they're coming to them and saying this is what's going to happen. They're not trying to put them in a hidden ship or anything.
And Picard does fight it as much as he can. He is willing to forcibly relocate them if he has to, but he fights.
And Picard doesn't dig Anthwara either. Like venerable Native American men just aren't Picard's thing, I suppose.
No. Well, they can't do slowmotion love scenes with him, so they don't make him want to do the mumba in his quarters. He doesn't do when there's an odd scene where he invites all the Native American guys up for a party on the Enterprise. Like, come up for a party. We're gonna relocate.
Get off that fucking planet party.
Yeah. Come and have some vol-au-vents. I'll talk about my family history, then fuck off. Out the demilitarised zone. And they're like, yeah, all right. They're pretty nice.
Sounds good. Yeah.
But yeah, then
ultimately he has an imperfect solution for an imperfect situation.
Yeah.
So.
And it would have been could have been interesting in that episode if he'd have had to go through with that force location instead of finding a kind of a third idea. But then the Maquis would never have.
There's a great. I like all the stuff when the Cardassians stuff. Gulliver and stuff. I like Gulliver.
Oh yes, because he's a recurring character throughout the Maquis stories.
I like the scenes between Picard and Gulliver in this episode. Picard's pretty tough with him.
Yeah.
And, Picard gets to do some good being strong and being kind of threatening in a way.
So I guess we've covered the sort of genesis of the Maquis, and then
it goes into Deep Space Nine with the Maquis two-parter where they formally and officially declare themselves as an organisation.
I guess there's preemptive strike, isn't there? I just want to say
well, I think the Maquis comes first in the timeline.
It does, yes.
And then preemptive strike.
I keep getting that wrong. I am sorry.
There's literally a point about 3/4 of the way through the Maquis Part 1 where they send out a subspace signal to declare themselves as a group called the Maquis, and they're going to fight against the Cardassian attacks in the demilitarized zone.
We just received a general subspace transmission from somewhere in the demilitarized zone. A group there is taking credit for the kidnapping of Dukat. They're calling themselves the Maquis.
Because our next topic is like key and notable episodes around the Maquis, and let's talk about Maquis parts 1 and 2 because that's where we're at in the timeline, and that's and also I think they're a great pair of episodes.
They're absolutely fantastic.
It starts with the destruction of a Cardassian ship, the Bucknor.
The Bucknor, and then and then an investigation which reveals that it was sabotage.
Traced back to colonists in the demilitarized zone.
And they Columbo it because we see the guy.
Yes.
So
yes, we do. Because Sisko's old buddy Cal Hudson, who he's never mentioned before, unless he has mentioned him before. Right, I knew it. He's never mentioned him before, and I was 100% correct about that. He shows up, and they're all buddies.
Because he's the liaison for the colonies and the.
Both our wives are dead.
And there's absolutely no way he's going to turn out.
To be a Maquis. But except that he does turn out to be a Maquis, and then for Sisko it's personal and it is in other episodes as well. But I like the character of Cal Hudson. Actually, I think it's a good performance, and I was sold on the idea of Sisko and him being friends. That works.
I think the two of them had a good chemistry. So it's even though he'd never mentioned it, I had no trouble getting into that.
But early on, Cal Hudson defends these people, doesn't he? Like there's a red flag.
Yeah, I mean he's trying to present their case a little bit more and sympathetically before he's ready to out and out declare himself, as leaving Starfleet and joining the Maquis. He's hoping to sort of garner some sympathy, possibly for recruitment, possibly to just generally highlight their cause.
Yeah, and there's this a lot of this. Well, a lot of the kind of issues start off on Deep Space Nine. So the guy, is he stunned by some aliens? who work for the Cardassians. The guy who plants the bomb on the Promenade.
There's a lot of back and forth. I think they end up snatching. The Maquis managed to snatch Gul Dukat at one point.
Mm. Yes, that's it. Yeah,
and so.
Yeah,
and
then
the Cardassian government tries to.
There's some nonsense with Quark and a Vulcan lady who he's taken a bit of a shine to, and that fills some time in a two-parter, which they always need. But I quite enjoy those scenes anyway.
Is it?
Yeah.
Yes.
I thought she was alright. Is she played by the actress that played Leah Brahms?
No, but she is played by someone who I can't remember offhand. I should have looked it up.
I thought you were familiar in a Star Trek way.
Yeah, she's in something else, and I can't remember for the life of me what it is now. Yes, so there's a bit of counterplay, like the Cardassian government at one point tries to pin all the Cardassian attacks in the on Gul Dukat and disavow knowledge.
That's in part 2, and that's in. There's an absolutely brilliant scene. Oh no, I think that's maybe in part 1, but then they kind of rescue Gul Dukat in part 2. There's a brilliant scene where Gul Dukat's kind of. He's hanging out in Sisko's. Is it in his office or in his personal room?
He's somewhere
having
in
a meal.
Yeah.
He's drinking Kanar and he's just chilling out, and he's really smug about how the Cardassian government are gonna be all up in arms about how he's been captured. He's like, thanks for rescuing me, but you're in a lot of trouble. And then Sisko's like, oh. Actually, Dukat, did you know this? The Cardassian government don't give two shits about you. They pin the whole flipping thing right on you. But Dukat's like, huh? But the scene plays out with a bit more subtlety and finesse than I've summarised.
I think that was brilliant.
I think that's how I remember it. But it's a great scene where Dukat is kind of humbled, and he's sort of forced to he pairs up with Sisko in a really unlikely sort of buddy cop style episode where they're together. And
one of them's a by the book Cardassian.
Yeah.
One of them's a rogue with a pot of gold. Together they police the streets of Los Angeles in a Dodge Charger.
He buddies up with a few unlikely people during the Maquis storyline, doesn't he?
Yeah.
Sisko.
Yes, we may get to some of that.
Yeah. There's a great because but this is the first time we've seen. And this is a bit digressing a bit, but this is the first time we've seen Gul Dukat maybe as a more sympathetic character. And he gets a great scene where they go on to kind of investigate. Because the Cardassian government are kind of surreptitiously arming their
colonists.
Yeah, their colonists, so they can fight the Maquis. And there's a great bit where Gul Dukat he does a little speech to her. They're gonna try and board a freighter, and Gul Dukat gets to do a bit of a speech, and he says. The guy they're going to board is like, I don't understand, you're a Cardassian, and he says,
I'm not just any Cardassian. I'm Gul Dukat, commander of the Second Order. You have 15 seconds to lower your shields or we'll destroy you.
And it's like that speech in Gladiator. It's a great Gul Dukat. And the guy, and then he's like, we're going to board your ship in 15 seconds if you don't stand down. The guy's like, blah, blah, blah. He's like, 7 seconds, 4 seconds. Oh, all right, calm down, mate. It's one of my favourite Gul Dukat scenes. It's really good. He's an absolute badass in that scene.
I definitely want to say about the scene early in part 2 where Sisko goes on a massive rant. He's just had Nechayev in the office, and she's basically said that he needs to go out there and tell the Maquis to stop mucking about and toe the line.
Just stop it.
Yeah. And he's like, what does she...
And
she leaves, and Kira walks in, and Sisko doesn't even seem to realise that Kira's come in, and he starts going, what does she think I've been trying to do? Yeah. And he turns on her and goes, you know what the problem is, Major? The problem is Earth. On Earth, it's a paradise. You look out the window in Starfleet headquarters and you see Eden. And he just... It's
easy to be a saint in paradise.
Exactly.
Well, it's easy to be a saint in paradise.
Well, it's easy to be a saint in paradise. But the Maquis do not live in paradise.
Out there, in the demilitarized zone, all the problems haven't been solved yet. Out there are no saints, just people.
Angry, scared, determined people who are gonna do whatever it takes to survive. And then they're like, huh?
That's it. That's it. I'm going to join the Maquis. Good.
Then he pulls his pants down, drops the mic, then he pulls his pants down and does a shit on his desk. That's how we remember it.
The thing is, like, well, yeah, obviously.
But we've kind of been a bit silly.
Yes.
But
I think what that speech does is set the direction a bit on Deep Space Nine, is that we don't take the Federation as the absolute ideal, that we look a little bit beyond this window of perfection and we look at where it hasn't worked. And I think that's a much more interesting set of storylines. Yeah. And also I just love that Sisko's gone on this epic rant, and then as he finishes, he just sort of looks a little bit like, he looks at Kira and he's just like, oh shit, I really went off on one there, didn't I? And then she's like, oh, nice speech. Maybe you'd like to give it to this Cardassian who just turned up.
And he's like, maybe I will.
It's the Cardassian legate, isn't it?
Yes.
Is it played by John Shook? Because he reminds...
I think he is, yes.
Oh, he's... John Shook is he in Babylon 5?
He's
Space Ghost
in Babylon.
Barry Space Ghost. He's a massive ham.
But he's also the Klingon ambassador in Star Trek 4 and 6.
Ah, right. I love that guy. I think the actor might be dead now.
I don't know. I think he was in Enterprise.
Oh, was he?
I think he was...
Oh, wait a minute. Enterprise is like...
Was he a Klingon
like
in
100 years ago?
Huh?
Was he a Klingon in Enterprise?
Yes. He was something to do with the augment situation. As I recall.
Yeah,
We'd have to look this up.
I feel terrible if he's not...
Played by John Shook, question mark?
I feel terrible if he's not dead, but then relieved if he's not dead, because I hope he isn't dead. But
you feel terrible. You feel terrible if he's not dead.
No, but I feel terrible that I've said he's dead. He might not be dead, but at the same time, I hope he's not dead. Anyway, going back to that speech, in a way, I think that speech is really important because it kind of sums up not only the whole idea behind the Maquis. It's almost like a bit of a mission statement for DS9 that this is a show where we're gonna peel back the layers of the Federation and reveal the filthy innards. You know what I mean?
And it contrasts very well with like how Picard receives Admiral Nechayev as well. Picard.
He makes some vol au vents for.
He makes vol au vents, and is it Valerian tea as well or something? Yeah. And it's a good contrast between.
But yeah, it's an absolute contrast between the attitudes of. But I suppose Picard is living in paradise, isn't he?
Yes.
Yeah. And Sisko isn't. Sisko's right out there on the front line in a run-down Cardassian station.
Underscores the difference between your luxury cruise liner of the Enterprise D and
he's like a sheriff in a kind of Wild West frontier town.
That was very much, I think, part of the initial concept, whereas Star Trek was conceived by Roddenberry as a wagon train to the stars. This was the frontier town sort of style in space. But, yeah.
Well, it's easy to be a saint in paradise. Oh, it's good. I'd read that they'd that this kind of line and to some extent the speech had been written before, and they tried to get it into TNG, but it had never been allowed. And actually, this could have been a line that another character had said. It was only at a point where they were finally allowed to do it in DS9 that they could come out with this. I think it's sort of the idea of probing into the Federation and revealing that it's not a paradise for everyone.
Is it in part two? Is it in part two where Sakona kind of asks Quark to kind of arrange a arms deal?
It's part one, I think.
Okay. But that kind of continues into part two, doesn't it? I think Quark's arrested.
Yes.
And there's later on in the episode, there's a great scene between him and Sakona where he kind of helps to prevent the use of those.
He's getting information, I suppose, isn't he?
There's also there's a pretty cool space battle at the end. There's like a fighter battle, which is really rare in Star Trek, and it's season 3 or 2, is it, Maquis?
Season 2.
Season 2. So
it's
you know,
pre-Defiant.
Yeah, and pre like heavy use of CG. So it's model work, and it's a bit clunky, that battle, but it's good.
Yeah,
it's really good. It's exciting.
I'm always intrigued by the Federation fighters that we see. How do they go back to a bigger ship, or?
Well, and this one is just using the standard runabouts.
Yeah.
But I think later on, when the war kicks off, we do see fighters. Now, whether I'm sure when they were talking about designing the Akira class, they said about having a landing bay of some kind, but I might have imagined that. But I don't honestly know what the situation with the fighters is. It's never established in canon.
I'm always intrigued when I like the Federation fighters.
I do.
I'm always intrigued by them.
We don't see them very often.
No,
so
mainly in Sacrifice of Angels, I think.
Yeah.
What marks Maquis ships out as Maquis ships? If they're just ships that they've kind of coupled together.
Yeah.
They always go, "That's a Maquis ship."
Yeah.
Well, how do you know?
They've
written Maquis on the outside in red.
I guess it's Federation ships doing non-Federation things, perhaps.
Yeah.
It sort of turns into a catch-all.
Really. So ships that'd be easy to get, like small transports and small like courier ships that have suddenly been bulked up with weaponry, I guess, would be a big clue. If someone stuck a couple of big phaser cannons on a little shuttle, that's probably something like that. And they do tend to have a standard type. That one they use in Voyager, the Chakotay ship, then shows up in later episodes, generally specifically as a Maquis vessel.
I guess the Maquis has small cells, so they're ships that the Maquis can operate. But they're never able to take a bigger ship because it requires too many people to operate.
Yeah, and where would you hide that?
Yeah.
So the bromance between Sisko and Gul Dukat totally ends where Sisko refuses to kill his old friend Cal Hudson, and he lets him go, and Gul Dukat's outraged. And then Cal Hudson is mentioned that he's killed off screen much later on in for the what's it called, Blaze of Glory, I think.
Yes,
that's when they reference Cal Hudson's death. Yeah, but I think it's important. I think it was an important thing that Sisko let Cal Hudson go. I think it's clear in this episode that he's fully on board with the Federation, you know, the Federation stance on the Maquis, but he's torn.
It's not enough to betray a friend.
No.
To him, these are still Federation citizens, so it's not an easy thing for him to fight and battle them.
And he gives Cal Hudson plenty of chances to come back, and there's a point where he gives him back his uniform and he phases it, incinerates it.
He shouldn't do. Look on eBay; those things are not cheap.
That's He put it on the uniform destroying setting.
Also, to be honest, wouldn't it be useful to have a uniform?
No, he wasn't thinking about that.
I guess it's a symbolic gesture.
And another question: what if he missed?
Cisco, you killed the table. That table was 1 week away from retirement.
We'll talk about the prospect of a Maquis person impersonating a Starfleet officer very soon.
Oh, should we quickly move on to preemptive strike?
Yes,
actually, because that's sort of next chronologically. And I also really like preemptive strike.
Yes, I like preemptive strike.
That starts with a good space battle too. On screen.
Does the Enterprise come to the aid of a?
You see some Maquis fighters swarm in a Cardassian vessel.
You see more ships on screen firing phasers at once than you maybe ever have done before.
There's some cracking stuff in there because there's also a bit later where you see the small fighter try and get inside the Enterprise's shield envelope and go right alongside the nacelle, which gives you a great idea of the scale of that ship to the.
And it looks beautiful remastered.
Oh yes,
well.
but we are getting ahead of ourselves.
I know. You're right.
Yeah.
So in this episode, Ensign Rowe, who's a character in TNG from time to time, comes back, and she goes undercover.
Yeah. Turns out she'd been in some sort of Starfleet tactical course.
She immediately goes undercover.
Basically, she's not been in several episodes.
They have a little party. She's really uncomfortable with the party, so Picard puts her undercover instead in a Maquis. And then she, over the course of the episode, she's really torn. She's torn over her allegiances to Starfleet, but she really feels for the Maquis, and
Well,
that's why they.
She forms a bond with a guy called Macius.
Yeah,
and I think
he likes a Hasperat.
In Ensign Row, you find out that she was forced to watch her father be killed in front of her, and Macius is definitely a father figure to her, I think. And yeah, he really loves Hasperat.
Spicy Hasperat,
really
strong
Hasperat.
And I'm not sure what Hasperat is, but I imagine it's some kind of like wasabi souffle or something.
Well, it was like
they do have a souffle version of Hasperat.
He was eating Hasperat, and it was like
a weird little loaf.
To me, it looked like a wrap.
Yeah, it was. Yeah,
so like a wasabi wrap or something.
Could be.
I happen to have seen the recipe as given in the Star Trek cookbook.
Of course, you have.
Which does involve basically taking flat tortillas, covering them in a layer of like something like cream cheese, and then putting in a whole bunch of like chili peppers there to give it some spice, wrapping it up and cutting it into chunks.
Oh, that sounds good.
That's nice.
Doesn't go into the souffle version.
No,
they could have served those at that get off that fucking planet party.
yeah, the Native American sort of.
Yeah, so
well, if Ro hadn't been back off at that tactical course, she probably could have given him the recipe.
Yeah. There's a point in Preemptive Strike where Ro talks about her trainer on that course.
Yes,
and I've read it's not official.
But there was an intention.
But it might be Chakotay?
Yes, I think that was. I've read the same thing, which would have been a good tie, and they should have maybe made that more explicit.
Because I'd read that the Native American colony that we see in Journey's End, that was meant to be where Chakotay had come from as well, and which would make sense because he's Maquis. So
yeah.
But again, they don't say that.
No, it's kind of one of those things that's left to viewer assumption a bit.
Yeah.
But
yeah, so in Preemptive Strike, eventually Ensign Ro makes is she an ensign at that point?
No, she's lieutenant. She gets promoted. I think the advanced tactical course is part of that promotion. So,
yeah, I'm going to call her Ro. Ro.
I'm going to call her. I'm going to call her Laren because we're pretty close.
You wish you were.
In Preemptive Strike, the Cardassians attack that little kind of cell.
Yeah,
and Macius is killed.
Yeah,
and I think that's the point at which she decides to join the Maquis.
Yeah,
I think what this episode does very well is give you that sort of insight into how a Starfleet officer can be swayed, and how this cause, the Maquis, is one that is very divisive. It's very easy to find yourself sympathising.
I think we're definitely meant to have sympathy with the Maquis in this episode, and there's absolutely brilliant scene, my favourite scene in the episode, where Picard meets Ro in a seedy space bar. We discussed it before, and his cover is that he she's a lady of the night, and he's
wearing his Mambo clothes.
he is, and he's gonna cross her palm with silver, and then.
And with something else.
Do the mattress Mambo.
I find that scene quite upsetting in a way, because I feel that when you take into account the father thing with Ro, that she'd seen her father get, and the reminder that Macius is, I feel that there's also along with the conflict between her Starfleet duty and Maquis, she has a conflict in her father figures, and that is Macius and Picard. And then that scene becomes a little bit disturbing in that context.
I think her conflict. I think she feels that she owes more to Picard than she ever does to Starfleet. But I think that is. It's just that there's all these things tied up in that scene, and just they're outwardly they're in a sexual encounter.
Yeah, I love
inwardly that what they're actually saying is he is absolutely laying down the law to her, but then she's also got this kind of father is laying down the law as her commanding officer, but also as a father figure, which he obviously is. And
I love the
in the end, you know that she's gonna.
I love the physicality of that scene. I love that they're really close together, and he's kind of touching her face, and she's stroking his face, but he's
head and
but juxtapose that with what he's saying. He's cheering her out and saying she's going to be court-martialed, and she has to not let him down on this. And
I think
it's just there's so much going on in that scene.
The point at the end where he stands up and he looks down at her, the expression on his face and the tone of his voice when he says,
Sorry, I don't have that kind of money.
It's just like, damn, I would just give up sex work then. I'd be like, fuck it, there's no point
would have
anymore.
really undercut the drama of that scene if Picard had stood up and he had a massive bone.
Maybe he did.
Yeah.
Oh, I'd just like to get through one episode without Picard's bonus. Just one episode.
I don't think we can record a single episode.
I can't actually. You know what? I'm going to just sit here for a couple of minutes.
Oh,
like an Earl Grey tea. Bring me my relaxation lamp.
You know, I think we really analysed the brilliance of that scene, and we completely undercut it at that moment, didn't we?
Yeah, we did. We sort of ruined all of the work that we'd done. That's
what we do.
That's a trope of our podcast. Yeah, as soon as we look like we're sort of saying something intelligent and perhaps meaningful, we totally reveal that we weren't. Because we were leading up to a boner joke.
I think that episode highlights the difference between the Federation and the Maquis. And the Maquis are just people trying to survive, and the Federation is an organisation, and it kind of goes by its the rules of a massive organisation. Just sometimes don't
work in
don't
that.
Work
yeah,
with people.
Whereas
a personal connection with somebody is always more powerful.
I think that equates back to Sisko's speech that out here not all the problems have been solved yet.
But also in general in life, like there are people that work well in big organisations because they understand what that organisation represents and they work towards that. Now, we will work in a massive company. People that do well in that company are people that buy into what that company represents.
Or at least act like they do.
Or at least,
and don't spend their working time on Memory Alpha.
Yeah. It's a bit of a... Sorry, you go to it.
Well, it's up until this point, we've only seen the Federation from the point of view of the Federation.
And people who are on board with
that, who also just fit in to the Federation.
Yes.
And now we're starting to see it from people who naturally don't quite fit in, or who have been literally forced out by the Federation.
This is kind of like this is a bit like the district in the previous episode.
Oh,
like a kind of like a sort of an abandoned people.
Yeah. But I'd fervently argue that the best stories through Star Trek are the ones that sort of get a bit, that don't just toe the Federation line and get a bit under like what's so great about it, how does it work, and where doesn't it work. I think those are the stories that have the richest value.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of things I want to see, and when I heard they were doing a new Star Trek series like a year or so ago, like a Federation Civil War is a story that I would be massively interested in.
I suppose in a way the Maquis storyline is a bit of a Federation Civil War. It's like a massively unbalanced one because the Maquis don't have... And most of the time they're not actually fighting against the Federation.
No.
That's what they say.
But imagine if there'd been a series...
The Federation fighting against
imagine if there'd been a series where that message kind of spread and built.
I suppose the Maquis feel that they're reasonably safe as the Federation won't go into the demilitarised zone to stop the Cardassians violating the treaty, so they're sure as hell not going to go in there and definitively stop the Maquis.
Yeah,
it's those operations that go out and around that they're going to cut supply lines and things like that. But theoretically, the Federation could take 3 or 4 massive fucking starships into the demilitarised zone and sort the Maquis issue out within 3 or 4 days. They won't because it's a treaty violation. So
it's a bit of a trope of Maquis stories in Star Trek that the Federation decides something. There's a big meeting up high with the senior managers, the CEOs of the Federation. They decide something. That order gets passed down to an admiral. The admiral passes that order down to Picard / Sisko, and they're the ones that have to do it. The admiral isn't really on board with that idea. The order that's come down is sort of a compromise anyway. But they're just like, you guys have to do it.
As soon as it gets to the captain, that's the point at which if it goes bad, the captain is screwed.
Yeah, pin it all on the captain.
Exactly.
Just like being at work, right? Yeah, you're right.
So, preemptive strike then is maybe the most effective demonstration of how Starfleet officers can be torn between the Maquis and Starfleet, and it's a very divisive issue in the Federation.
Rose's relationship with Macy is key to this episode. He's a father figure. He's nice. He's caring. The people in that community are just regular people trying to get by.
Yeah.
And it probably, I don't know. It seems to me that like it's something that Ro remembers from, and as a Bajoran as well, and the Bajorans were kind of, invaded and conquered by the Cardassians.
Yes, she would have good reason to understand their plight and sympathise with their fights. So I imagine there's a lot of Bajorans probably joined the Maquis because they had specific reason to sympathise, or maybe because they just couldn't let go of fighting Cardassians, depending on the traumas they'd suffered. There's probably a lot of reasons around that. But that's one of the interesting things about the Maquis. They became a very varied group. You had people who didn't come from those colonies.
Vulcan.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's something I wasn't.
Yeah. Well, they could find the logic in it. Because you can find the logic in anything if you think about it in the right way. So you'd obviously have.
If you're abandoned and have to fight for your own survival, it's logical to arm yourself.
But it's not, because it wasn't just colonists. It was colonist people who originally came from the colony, but then other people would go to it just because they felt sympathy for the plight, And as we see in people like Lon Suda, people who just wanted an outlet for their violent tendencies.
Yeah. Should we move on to the next episode I've noted down is Defiant.
I'm so happy we're going to talk about Defiant. I love that episode.
You really love Riker.
I do love Riker.
Alternate Rikers.
Yes. Yeah. So this was a brilliant episode because it starts off quite innocuously with Major Kira having a bit of a shit day, getting a bit stressed, and then Riker turns up and he's a bit like Riker the Lothario, putting the moves on Kira.
Did he put his knee up on her desk? And
we didn't see any knee up, and that should have been our first clue that this was maybe not Will Riker.
Right.
But he's chatting to Cisco, chilling. Then he goes to see the Defiant with Kira, and the first weird point is probably when O'Brien pops up and goes, "Oh, Commander," and he's like, "I've got nothing to say to you, O'Brien. I think you know why." And I remember when I first saw this, I put it on video, and I was not maybe completely up to date with everything. So I watched it and I was like, "Oh shit! What happened between him and O'Brien? I must have missed something."
Maybe it was that poo that O'Brien did in what was it? Shuttle Bay C or something in Emissary.
Maybe he does that wherever he goes.
Yeah, does a poo in a shuttle bay. And
he's saying that O'Brien is the phantom shitter of the Enterprise.
Of the Federation. Oh yeah, this harks back to a fairly obscure reference to basically just a point where O'Brien does an odd expression in the pilot episode of DS9, and from that we've assumed he does poos everywhere. That's the short version of that story. And we've really kind of undermined you.
It's not the first time one of my episode synopsis has been thoroughly undermined.
With poop.
So then he hijacks the Defiant, takes it out and beams Maquis, and it's turned out he's Tom Riker, who has sympathies.
Tom Riker, who was came about by like a transporter accident.
Yes.
In a TNG episode.
Yeah, it's a transporter twin.
Yes.
Yeah.
Last we saw him, he got a commission on the Exeter?
Gandhi.
The Gandhi.
Yeah. But according to Odo, while there, he started to express sympathies with the Maquis. So I don't know what this episode tells us really about the Maquis, because I think it tells us maybe a lot about Riker, and about the position where you have maybe a person who you feel has taken things that you should have had. So it's an interesting take on entitlement and issues like that around his character like that. I'm not sure if it tells us a great deal about the Maquis though. As Kira says to Tom Riker, you're not trying to be a terrorist, you're trying to be a hero. And I think there's a very distinct thing there, because he's got a mission. He's trying to find a secret base or something that the Cardassians have.
I guess he's been defined as the not real Riker. And as soon as that happens, that's probably... Because he's as much Riker as Well, Riker is Riker.
As they describe it, there's no.
Riker is the one that got beamed back.
Yeah, there's not like an original Riker and a copy.
No, there's two now.
There's just two Rikers, and they're both as real as each other.
But I'd agree in that. I'm not sure this is sort of an essential Maquis episode.
No,
as such. And as such, I didn't watch it.
I love it. I think it's a brilliant episode. But I do think that the point made is that Riker is trying to be a hero. He still thinks like a Starfleet officer, and for the Maquis, this maybe isn't that big a deal. Yeah, they may think it is, and they might think they're going to do some serious damage, but ultimately, it's not that big in a story in the Maquis sense.
No. So the next episode I'd noted down is For the Cause.
Yes. So
which has a great monologue from Eddington.
It does.
There was two ways as well, because initially the story is that Eddington and Odo go to Cisco and say, "We think Cassidy Yates might be helping the Maquis."
Yeah.
Yes.
And it's a really good episode for Cisco. He has some tough decisions to make.
Yeah, it's kind of quite a.
Yes, Gemma.
Does anyone think that Odo and Eddington should be holding hands during that meeting?
They're like, Captain Cisco, we've been talking. We've having some special meetings, and
I think you're right, Gemma.
That's my impression of Odo. It's different from my earlier impression.
That's what he says.
Oh, Captain. I don't know where that impression has come from. But just by immediately holding hands with another man, he's sort of become a limp boy. What does that say about
your
my
attitude?
Yeah, it says something bad. But there it is. That's that impression.
Okay. So yes, it's kind of almost a mislead on this, because you kind of think he's running around hoping his girlfriend's not part of the Maquis, and ultimately finding out that she probably is, and seeing if there's any way around it. And then suddenly, bam! She might be helping the Maquis, but ultimately Eddington's the one who's the Maquis helper here, because he's going to steal some big ass industrial replicators. And it's good, because all of a sudden this guy who's been a bit background, he's been there, he's had some lines, and you get sort of a general sense of him.
He was sort of brought in originally because the Federation didn't trust Odo.
Exactly.
So he was sort of another head of security.
And he was kind of like straight arrow, Starfleet, by the book.
And in the episode, there's been a conflict between the Cardassia and the Klingons. So Cardassia is in a bad way, right? So there's a relief mission to Cardassia with some transporters. No, sorry,
industrial replicators.
Yeah. Sorry.
Yeah.
But that twist comes out of nowhere, that he is Maquis. There's a point earlier in the episode where they talk to him about how he feels about the Maquis, and he just because there's a nice scene where they have a bit. I think it's like, is it O'Brien and Worf who are talking maybe about the Maquis? And Worf's like, the Maquis are all jerks. The Federation should just kill everyone who isn't the Federation. And O'Brien's like, I think Worf says something like, he has a line like,
they are terrorists. Little more than criminals, and criminals always make mistakes.
They're just fighting for something they believe in.
They should be hunted down and destroyed.
What for? Defending their homes? Look at what's happened to those people. One day they're eking out a living in some godforsaken colonies in the Cardassian border. The next day, the Federation makes a treaty handing those colonies over to the Cardassians. What would you do?
I would not become a terrorist. It would be dishonorable.
I wouldn't say that around Major Kira if I were you.
And that struck me as there's always a good balance in Maquis focus episodes where you'll have a character saying something a certain point of view, and you'll have another character countering that with a more sympathetic view. And it's good that they're main characters that you care about.
And to be fair, it would be easy for them to use Kira as some kind of in a Maquis episode, but she never really is.
But I think it's good to have the Starfleet guys be the ones who are divided, because that's one of the key things is it's a divisive issue amongst Starfleet and the Federation. Of course, you'd expect the average Bajoran to say, "Hell yeah, those guys are damn right to defend themselves against the Cardassians, because I know the Cardassians are twats."
Bajoran, like you were saying earlier, there will be Bajorans that definitely done that.
Bajorans will join it. Yeah, by all means. So I think following that conversation, one of them says, "What do you think, Mr. Eddington? What's your take on the Maquis?"
He's like, "Oh, well, I don't know. I don't have an opinion about anything."
Starfleet says to find the Maquis, I'll find the Maquis. They tell me to help them, I'll help them. My opinion is irrelevant. What matters to me is doing my job like a Starfleet officer. Anything else is an indulgence.
But I think if you go back to episodes like The Adversary, when there's a changeling loose on the Defiant, at one point everyone suspects Eddington is being replaced, but the changeling's double bluffing them. And a lot of people, I think prior to that as well, there's a point where Inar Brentane has led a joint Tal Shiar Obsidian Order mission to destroy the Founders, and the Defiant, Sisko takes the Defiant after them to get Odo back against orders, and under Admiral's orders, Eddington sabotages the Defiant to stop Sisko's unauthorised mission. So I think from that, people were always suspicious Eddington was a bit of a dark horse and would turn out to be a changeling. And so from that, the producers apparently decided he would never ever be a changeling, and making him a Maquis was their way of turning that on its head.
Yeah. Fuck you, producers. Guess what? He's a flipping Maquis.
Yeah.
What do you think to that? Oh, we're too busy with Voyager. Fine. Do what you want.
But it's a brilliant move. And then when he takes them and they realise he has this communication back to Sisko, and it's brilliant.
It is, and
I can see you've got it.
Earlier than that, there's a scene where he convinces Sisko that he should stay behind.
Yes.
Yeah.
He's quite the manipulator.
Yeah, he
needs to be.
And that scene, I think, initiates like the episodes after that for the uniform and Blaze of Glory.
Yeah.
The kind of this for the cause, for the uniform, and Blaze of Glory,
like a trilogy.
Eddington and actually
versus Sisko.
On the DS9 side, the Maquis have that then become Eddington's story, I think, from here.
Yeah, and I think that's almost like it maybe does everything that's sort of set up about the Maquis a little bit of a disservice, that it sort of becomes a bit of a one-on-one kind of issue, and the wider debate around the Maquis. It's as if the writer sort of maybe lost interest.
I think this is the point where we. No, there's elements in For the Uniform, I think. But, by the time we get to Blaze of Glory, the debate around the rightness of the Maquis is kind of a moot point because they've essentially been wiped out.
Yeah, but there's there's a great speech from Eddington, and it goes a little something like this, guys. I know you. I don't know why I'm doing that voice. I know you. I was like you once, but then I opened my eyes.
Is this the Emperor?
I opened my eyes,
young Skywalker.
Open your eyes, Captain. Why is the Federation so obsessed with the Maquis?
I don't know why he's going with it.
It's still going.
We never harmed you. And yet, we are constantly arrested and charged with terrorism. So be it, Jedi.
Starships chase us through the Badlands, and our supporters are harassed and ridiculed. Why? Because we've left the Federation, and that's the one thing you can't accept. Nobody leaves paradise. Everyone should want to be in the Federation. Hell, you even want the Cardassians to join. You're only sending them replicators because one day they can take their rightful place on the Federation Council.
You know, in some ways, you're even worse than the Borg. Ooh. At least they tell you about their plans for assimilation. You're more insidious. You assimilate people, and they don't even know it. Drop the mic, and he pulls down his pants, disappear on his desk. Force lightning. Vader picks him up, throws him down the reactor shaft. Mixing up my memories.
That's a great speech, but I think you could counterpoint that with what Picard says in Star Trek First Contact in terms of that Borg comment, where he says where he talks about the Borg, they assimilate entire systems and we retreat.
And we fall back.
We fall back. The line must be drawn here.
This far. No further.
Yeah,
and I will make
them
them
the
pay.
ones that assimilate, not them.
But that idea of that statement is kind of a militant comment. There's a point where this is a point where we stand and we fight, and that kind of idea around those colonies around the border Went around the demilitarized zone. I guess that's a similar viewpoint.
That's their line.
That's their line in the sand.
That's where they. Yeah.
But it's a great. I think it's a great point that Eddington makes.
With the bodies of the colonists they cast aside.
Yeah, and looked
Have
over.
you ever heard about Darth Plagueis?
Darth Plagueis the Wise.
Darth Plagueis.
Just a note about Eddington. The thing I love about Eddington that he always wins. He always wins. He
Until
always
he doesn't.
Well, no, but he does. He
No,
always gets one over
that's a
on
fair
Cisco.
point. That's a fair
Always
point.
wins.
And eventually that's what it becomes. Cisco doesn't care about bringing it to justice.
No.
He wants to win.
Yeah.
But he makes going back to that great speech that I delivered earlier on that I wrote, by the way. But he makes a really good point about the Federation being kind of more insidious than the Borg, and that if you're not on board with the Federation, then you're on your own, and
if you're not with us, you're against us.
Yes, only a Sith deals in absolutes, not obsolutes, Gemma.
Absolutes.
Absolutes. Damn it.
Absolutes and absolutes.
Right.
Now I've moved on to whiskey, and that's
it's showing.
But throughout DS9, the Federation are always they're always trying to get Bajor to join, and especially with the discovery of the wormhole.
It's interesting that ultimately they don't succeed in that.
Bajor never wanted to join. They've never wanted to join.
Well, I think they did want to, but they
But then Cisco said not to because the Dominion were going to invade.
Yeah,
and he gets them to sign a non-aggression.
But it's Eddington's point about it's another great example of DS9 shining a powerful light on the Federation, and peeling back the layers and saying, look at it from another point of view. The Federation are a little bit fascist, maybe. Is there an element of that
I would
in there?
say so.
I know you would, Gemma. You hate the Federation. You love the Maquis. But it's and it's really interesting that the episode touches on that idea.
Yes.
And then, as we said, I think from then on, it's kind of, I think
for the uniform,
it's maybe as if the writers felt like they'd explored enough with the Maquis, and it becomes more of a personal thing with
the uniform and Blaze of Glory. I think much more become Eddington's story and the Eddington Cisco story. And don't get me wrong, it's fantastic. It's a brilliant dynamic, and both episodes are brilliant. They are really awesome. There's touches of it when Eddington tries to defend the Maquis to Cisco, and he's talking about the starving people, the huddled refugees, and that's what he's trying to save and what he's trying to defend. And his goals are laudable there. And ultimately, Cisco makes it clear he hasn't got a problem with the Maquis as much as he's got a problem with Eddington. Because the difference is like this: if a Starfleet officer turns around to his commanding officer and says, I am not happy with the Federation's policy about the Maquis. Here's my badge and my rank pips. I am off, and I'm going to go join the Maquis. Eddington didn't do that. He used his position to help the Maquis and undermine Starfleet. And as Cisco succinctly bellows at the top of his voice, he betrayed his uniform.
You betrayed your uniform!
You betrayed your uniform!
You betrayed your uniform!
That's definitely going to be a clip.
Yes.
I'm going to add in.
So, but that's the point where this has now gone beyond the fascination with the Maquis, the really interesting stuff, and become still a fascinating and an exciting story, but it's a personal one-on-one.
And for the uniform, it's a great episode, and it's a great Cisco episode because there's the point where he kind of crosses a line, and
I think it's a precursor to
irradiates a planet.
It's a precursor to Pale Moonlight, really, isn't it?
Yeah.
In terms of how much further he's willing to go.
And then the Maquis are kind of wiped out as a bit of a footnote in by Inferno's Light, where they are off screen. It's mentioned that the Cardassian and the Dominion form an alliance.
Yeah,
and Goldacott's like, oh, by the way, the Jem'Hadar have destroyed all the Maquis, and all the Maquis are dead now.
They've driven the Klingons out of Cardassian space and wiped the Maquis out.
It's like, oh, okay, so that conclusion came off screen. Right. And if you're watching these episodes as a sort of a saga of the Maquis, which it kind of was, it's a little bit of an anticlimax because you're like, I didn't really. I got to Blaze of Glory and they were talking about the Maquis all basically being wiped out. I said, wait a minute, what did I miss?
Yeah, they could have had they could have an episode where they thought they had a truce with the Maquis and used the Maquis' skills as cells and terrorists to attack the Dominion.
Yeah, is there a mention that the Klingons have some kind of dealings with the
Were the
Maquis?
Klingons arming the Maquis at one point?
Yeah, because it's stated in Blaze of Glory that the whole point is the Maquis appear to have launched cloak torpedoes at Cardassia, and fearing this will trigger the war that they're hoping to stave off a little longer. Sisko forcibly recruits Eddington on a mission to go and stop these.
Yeah, because the twist is that Eddington wanted to go all along.
And these torpedoes never existed.
Yeah, and actually it was a way to sort of save his wife.
Yeah,
previously unmentioned.
He's only just married her.
Yeah.
So
he's going to save.
They met at a performance of Les Miserables.
Yeah. But yeah, he's going to save the sort of last pocket of Maquis survivors, basically. And it's another good episode, but
what if Eddington's favourite book had been something else, like
Paddington Bear
or Watership Down?
Yeah, Jurassic Park.
You know what? You are the Tyrannosaurus, and I am Dr. Alan Grant.
Going back to Gemma's point, though, that Eddington always wins, which I really, really like, actually, because he clearly wins at the end of For the Cause.
Yeah.
It appears that he doesn't win at the end of For the Uniform, but actually he's still the hero of his story in that. He's given himself up, he's sacrificed himself.
Sisko goes into a rage about how Eddington beat him.
Yes, he does.
Yes.
And is that in For the Uniform?
Yeah.
That's a great speech.
He beat me.
Yeah.
Is he a being with 7 lifetimes of experience?
Is he a being with 7 lifetimes of experience?
No! Is he a changeling?
Is he a changeling?
No! He's just a man.
He's just a man.
And he beat me.
And he beat me.
Yeah, that's a great. And he punches the shit out of his punching bag. Fortunately not Dax. He's there.
That's great.
But even by the end, I think Sisko's worked out the situation that he needs to give Eddington this situation where he can sacrifice himself. So in the end, Eddington's still the hero of his story. So although Sisko's won in that sense, Eddington's won because he's still, in his own narrative, he's still the winner.
And also in that episode, Sisko does attack Federation citizens.
Yeah, right. He does. And he's just a bit like
he poisons the planet with humans on it, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, they get off in time, but he does essentially take a colony planet out that they can no longer live on.
Did the Federation approve? So the Federation Council approved that move, and he's like, "Oh, must have forgotten to send them the memo."
It is a war crime.
If it had been a TOS episode, it would have been like,
"Oh, I must have forgotten, Captain." Scotty.
You and your drink.
But yeah, it's definitely that precursor to Pale Moonlight. That Sisko has got it's a very different approach that Sisko takes there, and it may not always be what you'd agree with morally.
Yeah, it's way worse than what he does in Pale Moonlight. In a way,
I suppose, yeah, but it's more.
Because that's for personal revenge.
He poisons the atmosphere of this planet, so it's no longer inhabitable by humans. This is a direct response to what Eddington's done in poisoning a colony planet of the Cardassians. And it's stated at the end that essentially the human colonists and the Cardassians will swap planets, which still seems a little bit too pat and neat to me. But I think he does seem to get off very easily for this.
That's nice though. So he could in the end he could be solving the whole colonist situation
by changing the atmospheres of planets,
and also he's the greater threat, and everyone goes, oh, do you know what, let's all just get along because this guy's poisoning our planets. He's way worse than any of us.
Maybe ultimately the Maquis and the Cardassian colonists would team up to stop crazy Sisko poisoning all the planets.
But going back to Blaze of Glory again, although so in this episode Eddington But he dies trying to protect his wife and.
But he does it. He wins. He has the heroic sacrifice and saves his wife.
He lied in order to get them there in the first place. Yeah. He played Cisco like a
game of Dom Shop.
Did anyone else think of the Bon Jovi song when they watched Blaze of Glory?
Going down in a blaze of glory. I never drew first, but I drew first blood.
I've known, son. Call me young gun.
I was thinking.
Yes, I did think of that.
And he saves them all. Well, he saves what's left.
And at the end, we get a little line from Cisco, which almost seems a little out of character, where he's sort of he has a bit of admiration for Eddington, which we never really got a sense of before, and he sort of says that in a way he kind of was. He was more committed to his cause.
Did he say something like, in a way, he was the most loyal man I ever knew?
Yeah.
I called him a traitor once, but in a way, he was the most loyal man I ever met. He was a Maquis, right up to the bitter end.
It's easy to say that when they're dead.
Yeah.
He can be magnanimous in his victory.
I fucking hate that guy.
Fuck. He beat me.
Was he a changeling? No. Was he O'Brien? No.
Also, what happened? What do we think Cisco did with the remainder of the Maquis, the people of his...
Right, because that's never...
I think he took them back to Federation space and put them straight into prison.
I think so too, probably.
Right,
yeah.
I don't know what the Federation policy about the Maquis was at that point.
I reckon he telephoned his mate Garrick and said, Garrick, I've got some prisoners that I'd like you to take care of. I'll let you use your imagination when I want done with them. Garrick's like,
don't worry, Captain.
Yeah.
I'll make sure that I look after them too.
The next day, Cisco's putting on his new waistcoat. He's like, what is this material?
It's people. It's I won't lie to you, Captain. It's human skin.
Right.
Oh, Garrick.
I'm going to assume that they were handed over to the Federation authorities, and I don't know what the policy was by that point.
I believe that mine and Rick's assumption may not be canon.
No. It's canonly horrific.
So then I
suppose we have to look at Voyager.
We should look at Voyager because, as Rick was saying, so the Maquis were developed. The seeds of the Maquis were laid in TNG and Deep Space Nine, so that come the pilot, they didn't have to have a whole bunch of exposition around who the Maquis were. But as we know in Voyager, they're massively underused.
The Maquis thread lasted all of about 5 minutes.
Yeah. I read that it was. I think there was a bit of conflict with the writers, and it was sort of decided that actually there was already too much conflict on DS9 and in Voyager. They, as a sort of a last-minute decision, they wanted to go back to the more sort of homely, everyone is friends feel of TNG, and so they nixed the idea of there being conflict, which meant that they couldn't utilise the Maquis in the way that they kind of planned.
We did have Learning Curve, where Tuvok sets up like a little mini course on being a bit more Starfleet for some of the more problematic Maquis, which I love, isn't it? I think it's a brilliant episode. I really love Learning Curve.
You get some backstory in those characters, don't you?
But that, in a way, that's also the that's the Maquis problem sorted.
Yeah,
that's the end of that chapter kind of thing. And
there's an episode called Hunters where they deal with the fact that the Maquis have been wiped out.
This
basically.
Really only impacts Chakotay and B'Elanna by this point.
Yeah.
Although it does lead to that really good episode, Extreme Risk, which deals with B'Elanna's like survival guilt. And she has some serious issues around that, and I think that was a very good episode.
And it's worst case scenario as well, isn't it?
I was going to say, I mean, although that's Tuvok's abandoned holodeck training scenario of what if the Maquis tried to take over the ship. It's a hell of a good episode. Yeah.
I also noted that the State of Flux, that's the episode where Seska is revealed to be a Cardassian.
Yeah. I kind of don't count that too Maquis wise, because Seska is following her own agenda as a Cardassian anyway. So it's like when she's turned against both Starfleet and the Maquis there. So, but yeah, it's kind of like I don't know where they might have taken it or the opportunities that it could have presented.
And then there's the repression as well. That's the one where some of the Maquis crew had some kind of brainwashing.
He activates.
They had a subconscious kind of.
He activates thing in Tuvok, and he then mind melds.
Planted in their mind, so that when they get a trigger word or something, or a trigger phrase.
It's pretty good.
Yeah.
It's a good Tuvok episode. I think all of these episodes they're sort of episodes about the characters in Voyager. They're not sort of Maquis episodes as such.
You get the sense that the writers are trying to do Maquis stuff as best they can within the limits of limits of what you was talking about.
And they're trying to acknowledge it, but
there's with the concept like the Maquis, which is so based on an area and a social situation in an area, when you move them so far,
it's like who are their enemies?
It becomes meaningless then.
If they're not fighting against the Federation, and there aren't any Cardassians, then what's the?
They never were really fighting against the Federation.
No,
were they?
They were just trying to defend themselves from Cardassian aggression.
Yeah. But I read that the Maquis storyline kind of ended on DS9 because in season 5 they really wanted to at least tie up some storyline. They wanted like at least one storyline they could say, right, that's done with, because they had so much stuff going on.
Yeah, and they were moving into the Dominion War.
Yeah.
So
this was a chance to say, right, that's done. We don't have to mention it again. The story is over. Maquis. So I think actually in our sort of agenda we've sort of covered. What do the Maquis show us about the Federation?
Yes,
I don't know if we really need to talk about that.
So shall we go around
Shall
we go around the table with our other one with how do we feel about the Maquis?
Yes, yeah. I feel that the Maquis gave us some brilliant episodes. I think Maquis parts 1 and 2. One of my favourite two-parters. It was one I'm revisiting. I'd not seen it in years, and I'd almost forgotten about it. But it's really good.
It is.
And Preemptive Strike is great. Journey's End I have mixed feelings about. But the drama around Eddington and the sort of Eddington trilogy For the Cause and For the Uniform, it gets away a bit from what the core of the Maquis were about. But they're really good episodes. So in that respect, I feel that the Maquis gave us some absolutely great Star Trek episodes.
How do you feel if you were there in the 24th century? What would your stance be?
I don't know. I don't know.
It depends on what you're.
It depends on where I live or who's my commanding officer or who I'm trying to impress. I don't know. I guess I have no backbone. That's the.
You're like Odo.
Yeah. What about I would like to defer this question to Gemma because I think I know Gemma's answer.
Well, I think the Maquis shine a light on the dark heart of the Federation, and if you're not with us, you're against us, and they're willing to sacrifice people on the periphery to keep the whole. And I would join the Maquis.
Oh my word!
Situation.
You betrayed your uniform.
I shit on my uniform.
Oh my goodness!
I know what Gemma's saying in terms of the Federation. I think it's almost worse that there's not a kind of Machiavellian darkness to what the Federation does. It's just an impersonal. It's just impersonal. Like ultimately, the Federation is an organisation which is kind of centralised. It's government, so everything comes from one place really. And then, like we were talking about earlier, one person a higher up makes a decision, and that goes down and down and down. ultimately that can mean that you start to look at people as just something on a map rather than actual individuals with lives, and that's explored in Journey's End, where Picard mentions things like doing things for the greater good. But who says that? What kind of organisation says the greater good? It's essentially if you use the greater good, that means that that's a utilitarian philosophy.
You're still imposing your own morality onto a situation,
and essentially it's the needs of the it's why I guess it's kind of a bit like what Spock says: the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few.
That 100% applies to the Federation's attitude to the
Maquis. If you're the ones that, but if you're
one of the
deciding who the few are,
exactly,
and the few don't get
and that's
a
what
choice.
the Federation does. It can start to decide who is the few and the one. And I don't know if we're going to imagine ourselves in that one. I imagine myself as a Federation archaeologist who's just happy to just go looking around ruins on far out planets. But I would sympathise. I would be a sympathiser at least, and I wouldn't be happy with how they were treated. I'm not sure if I'd join, but I would definitely be sympathetic and maybe get involved in helping them out. If Jem was in the Maquis and we were friends in this imagined world, then that would help you out.
I'd be willing to set up a sort of a podcast about the Maquis if we were in the Federation.
You could call it the Bush.
Yes, sympathising with the Maquis.
Oh,
the sympathetic Bush.
Oh, nice.
Some people like the Bush. Some people don't like the Bush.
But what happens in that scenario? Would you be outlawed by sympathy?
No, because I think freedom of speech would be a very core tenet of the Federation. He'd be more than allowed to.
And you know,
Harry Kim wrote editorials about the Maquis when he was at the Academy, doing the Academy newsletter.
He's such a nerd. You know how on the fence I am about everything. I would be very careful on that podcast not to commit to any point of view, as I did earlier on, where I sort of sidestepped the question and just said I like the episodes. Like the episodes of Star Trek about the Maquis because they are good episodes. Is that what the question was? I don't know. And what about you?
What voice is that?
It's my own voice, my own inner monologue. So I sound.
I think it depends on my position. If I was from one of those colonies, yes, absolutely, I'd be in the Maquis. If otherwise, I think I might sympathise, but I don't know if I would be willing to betray my uniform. Because Sisko would be very mad at me. I wouldn't be able to take that. I wouldn't.
No.
Or Picard. If Sisko or Picard, the look on Picard's face at the end of Preemptive Strike when Riker tells him, that look is just oh my god, yeah.
You would not want your father to look at you like that with that sort of disappointment and rage.
So I think if I was a Starfleet officer, I would probably, while feeling sympathy, I would remain. I'd do my duty. If I was from one of those colonies, I would probably be sorely tempted to take up arms with everyone else.
I mean, I think in many ways my indecisiveness and inability to commit one way or the other makes me A, a hero, but B, I think these episodes don't give us a clear answer. I think that
no.
And if Star Trek doesn't tell me what to think, then I don't know what to think.
Yes, at least past tense. Past tense was very much telling you the way you should be thinking about it.
It hit me so hard on the nose with that message that I received the message and accepted it. The Maquis, it's more. Yeah,
it leaves it down to the viewer to decide, which I love. But
but
I can see why that would be some trouble for you.
Yes. TV needs to tell me what to think.
So I think that maybe brings us to the end of our discussion on the Maquis.
I believe that's lasted an hour and a half.
Whoa,
which is
a
long one, but I don't feel there was any filler in that episode. I think it was all killer. I really enjoyed revisiting the Maquis episodes.
Yes,
actually,
absolutely.
I think I could recommend if you wanted to watch The Wounded, Journey's End, Maquis Part 1 and 2, Preemptive Strike, Defiant, The Cause, For the Uniform, By Inferno is Light, Blaze of Glory, and then maybe even Caretaker if you felt like it, you'd have an absolutely lovely time. It's a great.
You could watch Watership Down as well, actually. Watership Down are a bit like the Efrafa are a bit like the Maquis.
They are.
Okay, and then you can go to bed.
You can read the book.
Oh yeah.
Let's not wait a minute. Let's not get too sidetracked. This is how we get sidetracked.
Yeah, but but all I want to say is
if I want to.
If Eddington had read Watership Down instead of Les Miserables, he could have called his ship Prince with 1,000 Enemies, and that's a cool name.
Oh yes.
I still think he should have been obsessed with Jurassic Park, and he could have called.
Okay, you know what? I'm going to change my answer. I'm going to change my answer and say yes, I would be in the Maquis. I would read Watership Down, and that would be the name of my ship.
Okay. I'm still on the fence.
If Eddington, instead of loving Les Mis, had watched the old 20th century British TV show Allo Allo,
good morning.
His approach could have been very different. That's all I'm saying.
He would have talked to camera a lot.
He would have. He might have ended up having a dicky ticker.
Oh, American viewers are going to be so confused.
And also
listeners.
Yeah, but also British listeners who are not over the age of 35, as we reference British 80s sitcom Allo Allo.
We are nothing if not current and up to date.
Yes. Anyway, I think I tried to say this episode was finished, but then we did some more talking. But I'm going to try and say it again because I think this episode is finished, and we have some more recording to do tonight.
We do. Yeah.
Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you for listening.
I enjoyed this one.
Good night.
Good choice, Gemma.
Yes.
Yes. Well. Yes. Good choice.
Thank you, sirs.
See ya.
Love you. Bye.
Do you realize how incredible this is?
It's tradition.
You ever noticed her bum? What? Her bum.
Oh no!
Enough of this self-indulgence.
Thank you so much for listening to our podcast. If you want to get in touch with us, our website is www.lowerdexradio.co.uk. You can reach us on the Twitters at 10Backward, 10 being the number and backward being the word backward. We're also on Facebook at www.facebook.com/10Backward podcast. You can also email us at crew@lowerdexradio.co.uk. On a personal, individual level, my Twitter is @WiltHurland. Rick Everson's Twitter is @TrekFanRick. And Rick Palmer's Twitter is @Mr. Imhotep.
Hi, thank you again for listening to the podcast. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, you might consider supporting us. We now have a Patreon where people can pledge small amounts to fund our ongoing projects like keeping our website up to date, new audio equipment as we're going along, and potentially opportunities to expand our content. You can go look at this at patreon.com/lowerdexradio. If you don't feel you can donate but would still like to support us, we would love it if you could subscribe to us on however you get your podcasts, through iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, or we're on various third-party apps. And if you could leave us a review on any of those, that would be fantastic and we'd be very appreciative.
Thanks again for listening, and please tune in for more podcasts from the 10Backward crew.
Let's make sure that history never forgets the name.
10Backward?
Laddie, don't you think you should rephrase that?
10Backward.
10Backward.
Do you know what the trouble is?
No.
The trouble is Earth.
Really?
On Earth, there is no poverty, no crime, no war. You look out the window of Starfleet headquarters and you see paradise. Well, it's easy to be a saint in paradise, but the Maquis do not live in paradise. Out there, in the demilitarized zone, all the problems haven't been solved yet. Out there are no saints, just people. Angry, scared, determined people who are going to do whatever it takes to survive, whether it meets with the Federation approval or not.
Makes sense to me.
I'm glad Someone understands.